A writer for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette describes Brooklyn Rider as four classical musicians performing with the energy of young rock stars. NPR praises the group for recreating the 300-year-old form of string quartet as a vital and creative 21st century ensemble. John Mark Raffis speaks with Brooklyn Rider cellist Eric Jacobson about the quartet's inclusive repertoire. Jacobson discusses the concept behind the quartet's new album, the Brooklyn Rider Almanac, which features works by composers from far-ranging backgrounds. The cellist also talks about the look and feel of a Brooklyn Rider concert.
For someone who's not familiar with your music, how would you describe Brooklyn Rider?
Well, I think as a string quartet, we are entrenched in the classical tradition. I think, we all went to the conservatories that would lead one to believe, these are people that have been in their tradition, and their sweet spot is the classical tradition. I mean, we went to Juilliard and Curtis, and I feel personally that, studying the works of the Romantics and the classics were my training. That was what actually made it possible for me to play the cello the way I do, and therefore to translate it to any type of music. And I think the key is, for us, is that we don't really separate the difference between playing a Beethoven quartet and playing a piece of music written today, either by a composer outside of the group or by Colin Jacobson, my brother, who writes a lot for us. It's all in the name of bringing music to light. We often use the phrase taking, a new piece of music and making it feel like it's part of the tradition, with history behind it, and like it's, normal in the best sense of the word. Not normal in like a bland way, but normal like this is music that we could all listen to. And then also taking older music, music from the Romantic or classical time, and trying to sort of bring it to life in a way that makes one think that this is as vital and immediate today as it was 100 years ago or 100 years ago. And I think that's what kind of keeps us going, the idea of being able to create music that feels right, whether it's actually specifically geared towards a classical style or a new style, or maybe even some type of exploring a different culture.
You've been together as a quartet for a decade now, and your most recent recording is called the Brooklyn Rider Almanac. Tell me a little bit about that project. It involves a lot of commissioning.
Yeah, it's really fun. I mean, what we did was ask a lot of musicians from outside of the immediate classical tradition to write pieces for us based on an inspiration, I guess is the word we used, from the last 50 years. So in other words, take someone that you have loved in the artist world. So whether this is a writer or a musician or a dancer, choreographer, and use them as an inspiration for your piece that you're going to write for us. And I don't know, for me, it's a little bit like like cooking dinner when you're at home. You go to the market, and do you actually say, well, I could cook anything, I could choose anything, or actually, no, I saw that they have the freshest food they have is this piece of fish, so therefore that's what I'm going to do, and that actually helps you organize your whole thoughts for the entire evening. And so I think that giving people a jumping off point as use an inspiration, someone who you loved and have been inspired by in the last, that has been alive in the last 50 years. It was something of a jumping off point that people could really get behind, and very different, inspirations. Of course, Stravinsky, but then there was also Mark Morris and Faulkner, and it really ran the gamut. Photographers, other types of experimental artists. So a lot of very different inspirations, which was nice.
That sounds great. It's a wonderful concept. So the inspiration comes not only from other musicians, but from dancers, from writers, from visual artists. Who are some of the artists that you commissioned for the project?
Ruben Codelli, who's a great cellist and composer in New York. Dana Lynn, who's a violinist, Irish fiddler, and composer. Padma Newsom, who is a violist, but actually does a lot of arranging, and he performed for a very long time with the Nationals, the band. Dan Chords, who actually is the brother of Nicholas Chords in Brooklyn Rider, who's a jazz saxophone player. Aoife O'Donovan, folk singer, and from the band Crooked Still and Yo-Yo Ma's last album, The Goat Rodeo Sessions with Chris Thiele. Vijay Iyer from the jazz world. Greg Saunier from the world of Deerhoof, the band. Let's see. My brother wrote this piece, Exit, and that's with Shara Warden. And Gonzalo Grau from the salsa tradition. Christina Corton from the singer-songwriter tradition.
It's an incredibly eclectic list. How on earth did you narrow down the people that you approached?
Good question. I think, of course, the list that we started with was very long and exciting and fun, and I feel like we narrowed it down to be something that's still exciting and fun, but, it got to be a point where you had to, you can't just go on forever, so you have to make some decisions. I think it was a lot of talking back and forth and seeing what, not only who you love the most, who you think is the best, but also who might be able to do the thing, which is writing for a string quartet, which, most of these people had never done that before. So getting to do that was kind of like it was a leap of faith, and yet it was also, a known quantity because, the string quartet is very accessible in a lot of ways. It's, a low voice, a middle voice, and two upper voices. And it just seems like it's in the vernacular, even though a string quartet might be more of something that we think about from 100 or 200 years ago. It still works in, the Pythagorean theorem. Like it works, it fits the chord structure, everything. So it's very accessible to any musician who has compositional or creative genes.
What's the feel of a Brooklyn Rider concert? A traditional quartet would be seated in a semicircle playing. Do you guys sit? Do you stand? Do you move around?
We do stand. Actually, the reason we first stood is we were playing a concert once, and the place that we were in didn't have a raked theater, and we were on the floor. And after the first half, people said they couldn't see us. So the three guys stood up, and I sat on a higher, I sat on like a little bit of a podium, and that was it. We never sat down again because it felt so good for them to be free while standing, because violence feels more freeing. And then for me to be able to interact and actually be on a slightly higher podium, so I could be closer to them, it just felt like a good way to go. So yeah, we've been standing ever since.
Hear Brooklyn Rider in concert April 14th, 2015 at Penn State's Schwab Auditorium. For tickets or information, visit cpa.psu.edu or phone 800-ARTS-TIX.